Okay, so episode 8 of Keeping Democracy Alive. We have Michal David,
Hi.
a very close friend, my brother's partner. Super excited to be interviewing her. Anyways, my name is Rem Hellman. I'm a rising junior at Tufts, majoring in international relations. Um, and I work in Hillel with the Cummings Program for Holocaust and Genocide Awareness. I guess it's like the programming. Um, and this is an offshoot of the work I do with them. It's a social justice related series called Keeping Democracy Alive. And as I said, this is episode 8. So we're going to learn today about Michal and how she actively keeps democracy alive. So introduce yourself, Michal. I'm super happy to have you
Awesome.
here. And then introduce Ben the Ark.
Cool. Yeah, thanks, Rem, for inviting me on. It's fun
Yeah.
to be doing this with you in particular. I know your brother's very excited too.
Yeah.
So I'm Michal David, and I am based in Los Angeles. I work for an organization called Ben the Ark, which is a national Jewish organization focused on domestic policy issues. And as an organization, generally, we're working towards building a multiracial and multi-ethnic democracy and economy in which all people can live, love, and thrive. And at Ben the Ark, I serve the role of lead organizer for our organizing base, our grassroots base. And I'm specifically oversee our Jeremiah Fellowship, which is a fellowship program that supports Jews in their 20s and 30s across the country to become organizers on their ground in their cities. They go through a really intensive training process with us with the goal of ultimately building the power of their local Jewish progressive community, and supporting that community to fight collectively for immigration justice, criminal justice reform, and economic justice. And right now, in this moment in particular, to fight back against the movement of white nationalism that we've seen really take hold in the last 5 years or so in this country.
Yeah, as I mentioned to you before, I think that for the viewers, I think it's a good spot to talk about why there's no mention of our team on your website, kind of just to let people know how really relevant the threat of white nationalism is in America.
Yeah, definitely. So I've gotten this question a lot lately. Folks are like, where are you on Facebook? Why can't we find anything about your staff online? And the answer is scary and hard, which is that a few months ago, we put out a video that called out white nationalists in particular, for fanning the flames of racism and bigotry and anti-Semitism in our country. And we put it out to launch a campaign called We Rise as One, which is a campaign pushing back against white nationalism and pushing for this multiracial, multi-ethnic democracy that we're working on. And in response, we started being trolled in a really real way by white nationalists on the internet. So we had individual leaders and staff members who were being trolled, but not only that, we had a major security breach where white nationalists essentially got a hold of addresses of some of our leaders, started signing up for our events, and that was a real threat. And we had to pause, bring on this really incredible organization on board that's called Equity Labs, that's run by folks from Southeast Asia, who have been tracking actually the Hindu nationalist movement in India that we right now are seeing rise up with the election of Modi in India. And so they've been doing a lot of digital security work for their own community to feel more safe and protected in their work. And they've been an essential partner for us and trying to pause and figure out how do we do this work in a way that keeps us safe, but also keeps our partners safe. Our partners are primarily brown and black-led organizations, and so we've really had to pause and remove a lot of public information to make sure that we can continue to do this work safely.
It's crazy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's been a really intense time and a really scary time as someone who works here.
Yeah. I wanted to talk a little bit more about just like, I mean, we could talk about your vision, but I think you've already kind of laid that out there in terms of
Hmm.
what Bend the Arc is looking to do. So more about like your organizing tactics. I know that you
Sure.
guys have um I don't know what you'd call it, like a tactic called moral minions. So I
Hmm.
think it would be cool to talk a little bit about that and like what those
Yeah.
are. I like the title. So yeah, tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Our Moral Minion project started in 2016 when we saw really a upsurge of people who really wanted to get involved in our work across the country. For folks who don't know, a minion is 10 Jewish people who come together to pray together. And so we thought, what an amazing idea to think about grassroots organizing really being this thing that's actually based in our Jewish practice, but is not only about prayer, but really about action. And so what we realized was we, both for capacity reasons on an organizational level, but also from a values perspective of really wanting to actually decentralize hierarchical power within the organizing world and to give out power to folks in their own local communities to do the work that feels most relevant to them. We wanted to create this structure called Moral Minyanim. And Moral Minions are essentially smaller organizing units of people across the country that are tied to Bend the Arc. They're tied to our strategy and our vision, but they are innovating their work for it to be relevant to their local community. And right now, the Jeremiah program that I spoke about, that I supervise and oversee the organizers for, part of the role of that program is actually to have our Jeremiah seed those minions in cities that really haven't gotten institutional Jewish investment in. And so this year we're in 13 new cities, and the majority of them are in the South, which I know Rem is like someone who's born in Atlanta. Yeah. Someone who went to Emory for undergrad. Like, I'm super stoked about that and to see really the power of Jewish Southern organizing. So I'll just offer an example. Like, we have a minion forming in Louisville, Kentucky. Obviously, we all know about the murder of Breonna Taylor in Louisville. And so in this moment of Black uprising, this minion of Jewish folks connected to Bend the Arc has been able to engage in a really localized response to this horrible tragedy of Breonna Taylor being murdered by police. And they've been moving their local Jewish community on what it means to show up for Black folks in particular ways. So they wrote a letter asking the Jewish institutional community to come out to actions to support the Black Lives Matter uprising. And we're initially getting some really intense pushback saying, like, we don't want certain language in this around defunding police. We need to say only some police are bad. And these folks really held their ground, but they did it in a relational way that only people from Louisville could do with their own congregational rabbis. Like, they had the relationships to do that. And now we have rabbis signed on to this letter in Kentucky who would never have imagined signing on to a Black Lives Matter letter years ago. And so to me, that's the power of like local Jewish organizing that we're trying to support in this
Yeah.
Minion program.
It's really interesting because I obviously don't explicitly talk about with organizations or when I meet people in the street who are organizers about this hierarchical form of organizing.
Mm-hmm.
But it only really came across my mind and like as a thought last episode when I talked to Madeline Mardix from Not My Generation. And basically, if you didn't get to see it, Not My Generation is a student-led organization, literally like college student-led, to fight against gun violence.
Mm,
And we talked extensively in that episode too about just like how their form of organizing is really based on having um, like a yearly, maybe biannually meeting, national meeting, and essentially they're like, this is a time for you to have conversations, and what we want to do as a organization is basically provide you with the materials that you need in order to act locally. And we understand that each city, each college campus is going to have different tactics, whether that's more community based organizing, whether that's more legislative based and slash policy based action, like all these different types. There's no like, here's how we want you to do it. And I think that that's so much more impactful, and that seems
mm,
exactly to be what your guys' intention is with these moral millennium.
mhm,
Because yeah, like too often people are like, this is the right way to do it, and like like sure, like there might be like some general guidelines to abide by, but there's no right way to do it.
mhm,
And like exactly like you were referring to with Jewish communities, and I just mentioned, like everyone's so different, every
mhm,
community is so different, so it's really about like just
mhm.
supporting. So I like that. um yeah, I have a question, just like
Sure.
you're now the third, maybe fourth person I've talked to in which being creating a just society and being progressive really relates to this idea of fighting against specifically white nationalism,
Mm,
like this
mhm,
whole trend of white nationalism. And like
mhm.
I just want to like, I'm curious to hear what your thought is on why that is so focused on in this world of social justice. Like why is it white
Mhm.
nationalism as opposed to maybe other things that people might be afraid of? Like what is the true threat that we're facing here?
Mm, yeah, that's a great question. I think it's a great question in particular because it's fairly new within the organizing world,
Yeah,
and I think it's fairly new actually, like within the larger public discourse that we see in this country. And I will go back to saying that, like, I believe that like the power of organizing really does lie in the local work and in the work that can be created and formulated by folks in relationship with the power structures there. I also think that one of the things about national organizing work is that it really does have the power to change social discourse and public discourse. And so I've seen as an organizer in the last 5 years really enter into the discourse, not only this conversation about white nationalism, but its relationship to white supremacy. And I'm sure I haven't had a chance to watch all of your episodes, but I find that particularly as an organizer that is organizing Jews on the ground, it's really important for us to have this conversation, but to have it with a sense of grounding and differentiation between what is white supremacy and what is white nationalism,
yeah.
and how are different Jews implicated in each of those different concepts, and how are Jews targeted in each of those different
Yeah,
concepts.
talk more about that because I don't even know the difference.
Yeah, so this is sort of my work. This is like the public education work that I do. So when we talk about white supremacy, we're talking about a system. So white supremacy is a system that is intended to maintain the social and political dominance of white folks. And it's built on the degradation, oppression of white, Black, and Indigenous people. It's a system that in the United States, I would argue, was started in 1619 when the first slave ship arrived here with Africans, with the intention of building a society for white folks where they could have access to more capital, to more wealth, literally on the back of brown folks. It's something that in this moment of Black uprising, we're seeing in a really intense and visceral way. When we talk about systems of oppression, and particularly white supremacy, we generally talk about the 4 I's of oppression. So we talk about interpersonal oppression, institutional oppression, internalized oppression, and then ideological oppression. And I would say ideological oppression in the United States has really been the underpinning of white supremacy. So the ideology is that Black and brown folks are less than white folks. And in particular, in this moment of Black uprising, what we're seeing is that that ideology maintains and justifies a system of continued racial hierarchy. So in that hierarchy, there has to be a justification for why it exists. And the justification that's been established in this country is that Black folks are less smart, they are scary, they're meant to be controlled by the government. So that's a system of white supremacy that we see play out both in our institutions, but also in interpersonal interactions, what people might see as more blatant racism. That's white supremacy. White nationalism is a movement. It's a movement that's actually made up of different groups that believe in the system of white supremacy and some white separatism, which is the idea of white folks having a separate place to themselves. The movement of white nationalism believes not only and is working not only to maintain the idea that white folks are superior to other people, but it also is based on this vision and desire for what's called a white ethno-state, in which Black and brown folks are actually eliminated from existence. And it calls back to this really strange kind of, it like harkens back to this strange reality. White nationalists often do this, that actually never existed, in which this country was so white and Christian and pure. And what's important to articulate here, especially for a Jewish audience, which I assume is a lot of this audience, is that in the movement of white nationalism, Jews are targeted in that movement. Why? Because the foundational myth on which the movement of white nationalism is built is that brown and Black folks are not smart and not able to fight for their own power. So what we see is that there have been different moments in this country where movements of white nationalism have spiked, and they generally tend to spike when brown and Black folks are about to gain demographic majority or political power. So after the civil rights movement in the 60s, we saw a huge spike in the white nationalist movement that actually it really manifested itself kind of in like Reagan style politics, the war on drugs, for example, right? Black folks were gaining rights. And so there was an institutionalization of new laws that caused the incarceration of Black and brown bodies. In this moment, what we're seeing is that the United States is about to become a minority majority country, which means that folks who have been considered the minority are about to become the demographic majority. And so in that moment, white Christian folks, some of them experience a deep fear about what that means and losing their own power. And so this movement of white nationalism has formed as a result. And the last thing I'll say is that if this movement of white nationalism is based on the ideology of white supremacy, that brown and Black folks are actually not smart, not capable, the question that poses is, how do white nationalists reconcile that actually Black and brown folks are making progress? And the answer that we see given in the United States is that Jews are the underlying force that is essentially pushing and manipulating brown and Black folks, non-Jewish brown and Black folks, to rise up against the current power structures. And that does two things. It, first of all, is extremely racist. It suggests that brown and Black folks can't actually rise up on their own, that they need some scary Jews in the background to make them move and shift and rise up and protest. And the second thing is it sets up the Jew as the person behind the curtains, pulling the strings on the uprisings that we're seeing. So the last thing I'll end with, because I know I just said a lot, but I really want to, I really want to just get this.
No. I was just, it's funny because I was literally just thinking that, yeah.
Yeah,
No,
the last thing I really want to get across is really important, I think, as I'm seeing a lot of white Jews in our community really struggle to be like, how do I show up right now as an ally for my Black brothers and sisters, Jewish or not? And simultaneously, how do I get recognition of the really serious pain and anxiety that I'm experiencing living in a country where, for many of us, for the first time as folks who are white Jews, are experiencing actual violence in synagogues and other places. And what I can say is this: within the movement of white nationalism, all Jews, including white Jews, are targets. Within the system of white supremacy, white Jews are complicit in that system, and brown and Black Jews are targets in that system. And so what I ask people to hold as I do political education for them is that complex duality, that in the system of white supremacy, if you are a white Jew, you are complicit in that system. In the movement of white nationalism, you are a target. And so we can actually hold both of those realities. And if we really educate ourselves, both show up as allies and be really heard and understood in the real pain that we're experiencing in this moment in this country.
Yeah, wow. That was really well said, Michal.
Thanks, Rem.
No wonder you're going to law school. I'm just, sorry, I'm taking a moment. I'm just trying to like process and think about what I want to say. I mean,
yeah.
I think
what's coming up for you around this?
The first thing that comes to mind is like, I think that Judaism is amazing at teaching to love and to be a good person. And I think generally what I see amongst my Jewish peers is like a feeling of wanting to be a good person towards you. Like there's not much like explicit outward hatred towards other people that I experience. But what I do hear often, and I'm really not sure why, is like people voting for candidates who might be upholding more. I mean, to be blatant, and I talked about this with Mr. Greenblatt from ADL, like in 2016 with the election of Trump, whether or not it's Trump himself and his policies, and what he's saying, whatever the connection is, in 2016, since 2016, there has been an uptick, exactly like you mentioned with post-civil rights era, of incidents of violence against, of bigotry and violence against minority groups and Jews from white nationalists, right? Nice. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
And yet, even now, like, right, we're in this moment in time where there's a lot of frustration, a lot of hurt, a lot of sadness. I mean, you talked about it, being an ally and also feeling like that sense of pain and feeling of being scared. Like there's a lot of that. yet there's simultaneously, like, I'm not going to say a lot of Jews. I don't talk to every single Jew in America, but there are Jewish people who don't really fully empathize with the feelings that are coming across. And for me, there's like this real big disconnect, right? Like I especially remember this conversation I had probably last summer, maybe, I guess it was last summer. When was the Tree of Life?
Yeah, about a year and a half
So I
ago at
think it
this
was
point.
last summer, and
Yeah.
my best friend Jake was here, and it was me, Jake, my dad, right? And we're
Mhm.
talking, and Jake's really outspoken, progressive, cares about creating a just world and cares about other people a lot. And we're talking, and my dad and Jake are like talking about the threat of white nationalism, the threat of of violence, not just against minorities, but also more personally against Jews, right? And I'm like,
Mhm.
like I don't I don't really fear anything like that. Like
Mm.
it seems not to be really relevant to my life. It seems to be pretty distant. Like
Mm.
I walk around the streets, and because I'm white and I don't necessarily like, I might
Mhm.
look a little
Mhm.
bit Jewish, but like I'm not like, I don't have payas and a black hat or a kippah on or tzitzit, right? So like I can get by even in like deep South Georgia when I was doing
Mhm.
sales for AT&T. Like I could pull up to a racist house and sell
Mhm.
them AT&T because I'm
Mhm.
white,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
So I didn't feel that sense of like fear.
Mhm.
Literally a week later, the Tree of Life incident happens, and
Mhm.
like like not simultaneously, and then continuous attacks on not just minorities or just
Mhm.
like shootings at like high schools, but specifically targeted Jewish attacks, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
And exactly like you said, like white nationalists aren't, they're targeting us
Mhm.
as Jews as well as people who aren't white. And so how at a time like this are
Mhm.
you not understanding? Like how
Mm.
do you not get it? Like it just doesn't
Mm.
make sense to me.
Mm.
I don't know. There's just like there's so much that's brought up. I highlighted something on your guys' website that I just want to make sure
Sure.
I get to. Let's see. Come on, computer. Uh, I'm not gonna find it quickly. But yeah, I'm just curious to
Okay.
hear what you think about that. I guess while I look for that.
Yeah, I mean, I think first of all, thank you for sharing that. Like, I think that really quick switch for a lot of white Jews in particular, like, was real with Tree of Life. I guess I'll say two things, which is that the first, right, like, and I think to just really underscore your point, the manifesto that came out um, by the shooter at Tree of Life specifically articulated that he was attacking this Jewish synagogue because they were bringing in immigrants, brown immigrants, into this country. And so just to sort of like underscore that point of the narrative around the conspiracy theory around Jews like fueling this power change and white power and supremacy in this country played out really, really in that shooting.
Yeah.
um, I think the other thing I'll say is that, I think for a long time, like I think for many white Jews in particular, there is a lot of confusion about where to find our safety. And I think that's why the like not getting it that you're talking about happens. So like it's a pretty new phenomenon for most non-Orthodox white Jews in this country to feel a physical feeling of unsafety in like just existing in this
Yeah.
country. That feeling of lack of physical safety and emotional safety, particularly for Black and Brown Jews and non-Jews, has existed for centuries in this country.
Yeah.
And so it's become very clear for those folks, right, that like the police is not where to seek safety. But for white Jews who are just newly sort of experiencing this fear, um, I think for many of them, there's disclarity about where that safety is. And I think that there's actually an attempt by folks on the right, and within the white nationalists, but even not within the white nationalist groups, just like on the right in general, to confuse Jews about where they should seek their safety. So I think that there is, because white Jews have been granted access to whiteness, they've been convinced that the way to stay safe is to continue to cozy up to white power structures in this country, despite the fact that we actually see like non-Jewish white politicians explicitly saying, and I will, like, far right politicians saying like really anti-Semitic stuff. There's also been this convincing of white Jews that like they can't be safe with finding solidarity with non-Jewish communities of color, because the anti-Semitism exists in those communities.
Yeah.
And like, I just want to be clear, anti-Semitism does exist in like non-Jewish communities of
It's
color that
everywhere.
are progressive, but exactly, it exists everywhere in the same way that transphobia, racism exists everywhere.
Yeah.
And the difference is that in these progressive communities, coalitions with people of color, with Jews and Jews of color, there is actually an effort to work towards like understanding those oppressions for the sake of all of our liberation.
That's
Whereas on the right, that anti-Semitism, which also exists, is killing us on a daily basis, is motivating white people, white Christian people with guns to come into synagogues and shoot us. And there's also a confusion that's happening where a lot of white Christian folks on the far right have actually been abusing the naming of white of anti-Semitism to divide us.
yeah.
So I'll give an example, like when Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, like just not commenting on her politics, just saying her name, like when she called detention centers for immigrant kids concentration camps for the first time, it was not at first progressive Jews who were upset or offended by that. It was actually first rhetoric coming out from the non-Jewish Christian right that was saying, that's anti-Semitic. See, she's an anti-Semite. You can't trust her. And it started to confuse our community. It started to make white Jews feel like we have to separate ourselves from these folks in order to be safe.
Yeah.
When in fact, that was a ploy on the part of the right to keep us divided, because the policy of divide and conquer has always been one that has been instituted by this state and other states experiencing fascist-like tendencies. That's about dividing minorities into being against each other and feeling like they have to be against each other. Because if we all came together, Remy, we would win. If we all came together, our power would be so great that there is no way that white Christian folks in this country who are interested in a white supremacist ideology would ever maintain their power structure. So we have the choice to choose to not buy into that.
Yeah, I think we're running out of time, unfortunately. I mean, luckily I know you, so I can talk.
We can keep talking.
For this interview, it's unfortunate. So I'm gonna comment, ask one question, keep the answer brief, and then ask my standard closing question.
Great.
So the comment is, you mentioned just like this idea of educating ourselves on history. I think we've talked about it already. Like it's kind of been a theme throughout what we're saying. And that's literally, I think, episode 3 or 4, maybe 2. Episode 2 of what I did was facing history in ourselves. And it's not explicitly a Jewish organization, but it's this whole idea of, as a society, history has the answers. I mean, the rhyme of history, it's like a basic concept you learn in Intro to International Relations at Tufts. And just like this whole idea, like if you actually study history, you can find these trends of what is happening or what might happen, right? And so just like, I think this is something that's really coming up right now, especially with the moment that we're in, of just really, as a society, coming together and rethinking what we actually are educating ourselves with. Like, what's
Mm,
the history that we're teaching ourselves, and who is the history centered on, and who is it about? And that's going to be so important in creating change in the future. And
mm,
I mean, change is going to come, not like there might be some instantaneous change, but it's more so going to be a generational struggle, and ensuring that we're educating the youth with the right materials
mm,
about everyone, um, and about even recent events, right? Like, I think too frequently people are forgetting how recent the civil rights era really was, right? And how recent slavery even really was, and Jim Crow,
mhm,
and the Tulsa, like all these things. And I mean, even the Holocaust, right? Like the Holocaust and the Rwandan genocide. This is literally what I'm doing with the Hillel programming. It's like
mhm, mhm,
reminding people like this is real. Like yeah, we live in America and we're lucky to generally feel safe with our surroundings and feel like we're not going to get shot up by some crazy person, but those people exist. Like, that's a
mhm,
real
mhm,
thing that you also have to think about. But the thing is, those people aren't born that way. That's like
mm,
the thing that keeps getting mentioned right now. People aren't born that way, they're raised that way. And so as a
mm,
society, we need to rethink how, what, even if what we're teaching might not explicitly be saying like it's okay to be a white nationalist, or it's okay to not
mm,
like black people, like even if it's not explicitly mentioned, which I'm sure
mm,
some might argue it is, like
mhm,
there's definitely undertones that we need to like think about as a society.
mhm,
My question, which I don't know if you can answer quickly, but I just wanted to bring it up at least, is like on your website it says, um, our vision of we're trying to deliver our vision of a country that is inclusive, equitable, and supportive of the dignity of every person across race, class, gender, and faith. Every Yeah. And so I wanted to just bring up the word equitable,
mm,
because I think that, again, coming back to like your program again, for viewers listening at this point, I know it's been like 40 something minutes, but it's about Judaism, right? Like, I think too frequently, as Jews who might be successful and have a stake in some company, or have a stake in what foreign like whatever it might be, in the
mhm,
stock market, whatever it might be, we're afraid to vote for what might be right, because we're
mm,
afraid on maintaining a life that we're currently living.
mhm,
We're
mhm,
afraid that we might lose our stakes in certain companies, or we might, whatever it is. And I think equitable is a really important word, because I think people need to like rethink this idea of like voting for progressive candidates. They're not seeking to like ruin
mhm,
your way of life. Like
mm,
maybe if you're living in like a 30,000 square foot house, then maybe you should vote conservative in order to like maintain your
mhm,
extravagant,
mhm,
ultimately like pretty
mhm,
messed up lifestyle, in my opinion. I hope that's not controversial. But like voting progressive, like it's not about ruining your life and creating a society that isn't economically productive. I think
mm,
having an economically productive society actually is what they're striving for above anything. But for these progressive candidates, what it means to have an equitable society means that everyone is at least having a life that is remotely equitable, right?
mhm, mhm,
Um,
mhm.
so yeah, I just wanted to bring that up. You seem to be
Yeah.
head nodding. So yeah, like as quickly as you can answer, just like, was that something you guys were thinking about when writing that? Like, because organizations aren't really writing equitable, especially,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah, I mean, I think when we write equitable, what we mean is that like not everyone's going to have the same thing. Like to me, equitable is like um recognizing that like we are working towards a world in which everyone has access to what they need, and those needs are going to look and be really different for different people.
Yeah.
If you're experiencing mental illness, if you're experiencing houselessness, you're going to need a different level of support. And if we went back to the term like equality, what that would mean is that everyone got the same amount of support no matter who they were. When we talk about equity, what we talk about is that actually the systems that have built oppression in our society and continue to maintain them, if we're going to undo them, what's required of us is to think and be okay with the fact that some people are going to get more support than others,
Yeah.
in order for us to actually reach an equitable society.
Yeah.
If you are starting 10, 20 feet back from where someone else is starting because of your identities that are oppressed, you require 10, 20 more times support from our community and our communal structures in order to live a life in which you're not just surviving, but you're thriving. And that's what I think we mean in terms of equity.
All right.
Yeah.
So yeah, my final question. Sorry, it's just like we got
Yeah.
class and we're kind of running. Um, the question I really like to close on every time is just like, what can I do? What can listeners do to help? Whether it's supporting Bend the Arc, but more generally, I like to say just like help the mission that you guys are aiming
Mm-hmm.
to achieve. Like what can we
Yeah.
do besides just donations?
Yeah. In this moment, y'all, like, tap in deep to what is being led by Black organizers in your community. Those are the folks that have for years been leading the movement and the work that has gotten us into this point right now.
Yeah.
A lot of the reflecting that I have been doing in the last few days has been around, in the last few weeks, has been around the fact that people keep saying this thing like, we are now at this point where we're getting to see all these things come true that we never even believed could happen, whether it's defunding the police or rent freezes. And what I want to say is that maybe perhaps for some of us, we never thought that could happen, but Black folks have been carrying that vision of liberation since they were brought onto these shores in 1619. And between the last uprising in 2014 in Ferguson to today, Black organizers have been carrying that radical vision of what can be forward. And that's because they are required to live in this world with a deep sense of resiliency and hope in order to survive. And it also requires a deep amount of labor and exhaustion. And so what I will say to you is listen hard for what is being asked of you now, but in 3 months from now and in 5 months from now, continue to listen to those radical voices of imagination that Black folks are lifting up, because those are the visions of what will come to be in 5, 10 years from now, when with all of our energy, we have another uprising to continue changing, to continue moving towards liberation. Stick around, be in it for the long haul. If that means resting, if that means reading, educating yourself, do that. And the last thing I'll say is look to other moments of Black liberation and real freedom that have existed in this country. I just watched a video, and this is relevant to you too, Rem, about the Gulaguchi, who are our community of Black folks off the islands of Georgia and the Carolinas, a community of freed slaves who built a beautiful Black liberated community that's now unfortunately being destroyed by capitalism and by whiteness. But watching those images of Black liberation, reading the statements of Movement for Black Lives reminds me that the vision for Black liberation is not just about Black folks being free. It's about all of us getting free. And so we need to figure out, what is it that we need to get free from? What are the internalized systems of oppression? that are keeping us down, that are keeping us from being fully in support of this work and this vision. And so do that internal work and show up at protests, and show up at protests in 5-6 months from now when the momentum has died down, but Black folks are still carrying that vision forward into the future.
And be a loving person. I really like that. And just to kind of tie that thought together, not to put words in your mouth, but the protest that I went to, an original chant that I heard was, remember, remember all this in November. About it 5 months, it's not going to die out, and just keep moving. Thank you,
keep
Michal.
that fire.
I always love talking to you. Like I said, I'm so thankful to have you as in my life so I can have conversations like this whenever. Thank you, and have a good day.
Thanks, Remy. Bye, y'all.